Joseph Parker is the new WBO heavyweight champion of the world. So first and foremost in this video, massive congratulations go out to Parker, his team, his fans for the victory in the fight against Andy Ruiz today. The fight was razor close on the judges' scorecards. One judge had it a draw, 114-114. Two judges had it by a whisker to Joseph Parker, scoring it 115-113. On my personal scorecard, I agreed with the two judges. I had Parker winning the fight by 115-113. Although certain rounds were very close. It was a very cagey beginning, and rounds I really felt could have gone either way. I actually, whilst I scored it 115-113, I couldn't really have a complaint with scoring this fight a draw either. I think 114-114 is a perfectly acceptable way of scoring the fight. So I think it was actually fairly good decisions from the judges. I was worried when it went to the scorecards we may have a bit of controversy and we may have the judges scoring very, very widely for Joseph Parker and then there being accusations of home advantage. I believe from my Twitter there's a substantial number of individuals out there who seem to believe that Andy Ruiz won the fight. I can see why there's going to be disagreement in a fight of this nature. The two fighters brought very, very different styles, and I think if you're one of those people who prefers one style to another, it could lead to discrepancies in the scoring. The way I look at this fight is that Joseph Parker put in a performance which I would class as ever so slightly disappointing. I mean, the guy's gone out, he's won his first ever world title, it's great news for him, massive congratulations go out to him, and because of that, it's purely positive. But if you actually break down the performance, if you take the world title away from it, I actually felt the performance here was ever so slightly disappointing. And I felt that really the reasons that he was able to win this fight was because of his superior size advantage and his fitness and athleticism, which is something we'll come on to more in the fight. Andy Ruiz was making life very, very difficult for Joseph Parker here. Joseph Parker, for my money, has the better jab than Andy Ruiz. But for large portions of this fight, Andy Ruiz was winning rounds behind a jab. And this is something that I've been talking about when I've been covering Joseph Parker for years now. Parker's jab was bang on. But early on, I think it was early as the first round, we saw one of these fighters doubling up their jab. Which fighter was that? Andy Ruiz. In the very first round, you see Ruiz throw a jab, which misses, and then step into range behind the first jab, throw a second jab, which snaps Parker's head back. We then also see Ruiz banking jabs to the body throughout the course of the fight. Now that is exactly two examples of what Joseph Parker is not doing with his jab. Parker's got a very quick, precise, telescopic jab. I really, really like it. But as I've said time and time again, he's not doubling it up. He's not going to the head, going to the body. There's a few occasions in this fight he does double up the jab, and when he does, you can see instantaneously the effect it has and how easily it scores on Ruiz. And I really felt if he'd adopted that tactic from the beginning of the fight and utilised it consistently throughout, he'd have won a much wider points decision here. Ruiz was coming forward, Ruiz was the aggressor, Ruiz was bringing the pace. If Parker had stuck that double jab on him, changed levels with it, really, really got that established, I think Ruiz would have been dissuaded. I think it would have been much easier for Parker to edge some of the closer rounds. Ruiz did a lot of stuff that was very, very good in there. Unfortunately for him, he was a bit slow on his feet at times in this fight. And Parker, whilst he may not have naturally got the quickest feet in the world, what Parker has is a core of real natural athleticism, which meant that Parker was able to circle round the ring for large portions of the fight. And that athleticism allowed him to circle around Ruiz and just stick that jab out constantly. And, that range, that reach, that size advantage combined with that athleticism, for me, was what won Parker this fight. Because Ruiz was trudging forward, but he was just a bit slow and he couldn't, whilst he was doing the right things in terms of cutting down the ring, he couldn't stop Parker from circling out and from creating that distance yet again. So for me, it actually was Parker's long-range game here that was where he won the fight, although I do feel he should have won it by a lot more convincing margins if he'd utilised that jab in terms of doubling it up and changing levels with it a bit more. Ruiz at times was a bit raggedy. He was coming in throwing windmilling punches, very, very wide looping punches, and when he did that, Parker's slightly cleaner, slightly more consistent straight punches were, the difference between the two. But when Ruiz was able to close the gap and, to bring down that distance, and for me that was particularly obvious in the last third of the fight, when that was occurring, there was a bit of uncomfortableness there from Joseph Parker. Ruiz was adopting the technique of looking to throw punches with Joseph Parker. He was looking to throw as Joseph Parker unleashed, and that was an effective tactic. Both men in there had good chins, so we never really saw someone look like they were about to get knocked out. But Parker is very, very, very vulnerable when he's throwing. Time and time again in this fight, you see Parker look to unload, and then Ruiz just dips under and catches him with that left hook. Parker very, very vulnerable when he's throwing, and that's because limited head movement, head straight up in the air, hands down. Parker's always been a guy he's got some defensive awareness, but I think he lacks basic defensive fundamentals. When he throws his jab, the jab comes from his waist. He doesn't throw the jab and bring it back to his chin. He throws it jab from his waist. His head is straight up in the air. The head movement, I know people are saying he's improved his head movement. It's not elite. And when you've got something like that, when you've got that sort of limited upper body of head movement, it does mean you're vulnerable to being caught when you're engaging. And we saw Andy Ruiz do that time and time again. And Ruiz was able to close that gap and bring the fight to the pocket and bring that fight to the inside. I thought Parker was uncomfortable. I thought Ruiz was more effective in those positions. And I actually thought that on the whole, Ruiz turned to be the better inside fighter on the night. So I guess what I'm saying is, here's my concerns from a Joseph Parker perspective. You've won the world title, you've beat an undefeated fighter who's highly rated in certain areas, fantastic. However, who used their jab better? Possibly Andy Ruiz. Who came on stronger and won the later rounds? Possibly Andy Ruiz. Who was the better fighter on the inside? Possibly Andy Ruiz. And that's why when I actually look at how Parker won this fight, I think the size advantage in terms of winning those rounds where Ruiz was low volume behind that jab were key. And I think the athleticism and being able to circle for 12 rounds were key. Now, the problem Parker's going to have is that those advantages that he enjoyed tonight over Ruiz, he is not going to enjoy against future opponents. Parker is the world heavyweight champion of the WBO now. He is going to have to fight mandatory opponents who he has no choice who they are. He is maybe going to have to look at fighting some of the top heavyweights in the world. And Parker is yet to fight what I would class as an elite big man in the heavyweight division. Sure, he fought Alexander Dimitrenko, but Dimitrenko wasn't in his level. Parker's going to have to be looking at the guys, the likes of Deontay Wilder, Hughie Fury, those sort of names. The guys in the heavyweight division, the monsters, the Vladimir Klitschko's, the Anthony Joshua's, the Tyson Furies, those real big guys. And the way he fought tonight, I have concerns about him dealing with that size difference, because I felt the size difference he enjoyed over Ruiz was so key to his performance in actually winning this fight. So if that was taken away from him and he was actually the smaller man in there, I have real concerns. I also think that Ruiz and his lack of foot speed at times and his lack of punching output were the real difference maker in this fight. I felt that Ruiz potentially had the tools and the skills and the ability to beat Joseph Parker. What he didn't have was the punch volume and the foot speed. But as he moves up, as Parker moves up from the Cams and Ruiz's to, looking at that top 5 band of heavyweights in the world, those guys are going to be equally as athletic than him. You're going to find guys with a lot quicker foot speed than Andy Ruiz, a lot higher punch output than Andy Ruiz, and who are a lot better conditioned than Andy Ruiz and live an athlete's lifestyle. And based on that, I, at this stage, have concerns about Parker fighting that top 5 banding of heavyweights. We've seen Parker in very close fights now with Andy Ruiz and Carlos Takam. On both occasions he's come out on top, but he's come out on top by a small margin. He's won by a round, 2 rounds, he's won by that sort of margin. These are very good learning fights, these are good experiences. But has he shown enough to make us think he can take the jump from beating a Carlos Takam and an Andy Ruiz to beating a Deontay Wilder or a Tyson Fury? For me, at this stage, I'm unconvinced, and I would like to see Parker. I know he's just won the World Championship. I would like to see him handled sensitively. He's still very young. It's still early days in his career. There is no need to put him in the mega fights right now if it can be avoided. The fight itself was one that, for me, never truly caught fire. There were a few moments where Ruiz was really looking to, force the pace and throw huge haymakers, and there were a few very interesting rounds. On the whole, I wouldn't say this was a vintage performance from either man, and I was kind of left feeling somewhat frustrated by both guys' performances. Ruiz, I thought he performed well, but just didn't do enough of what was effective, and I think that essentially cost him the fight. I think if you're going to someone's backyard, you need to have the mentality of really doing a lot more in order to win the belt. And frankly, regardless of whose backyard it is, as I say on my scorecard, I narrowly edged it to Parker. So I just don't feel Ruiz did enough. As for Parker, I do feel he did enough to win, but the same mistakes that I feel have been in Parker's game for several years now are still there. He's still very vulnerable defensively. He's still not using his jab properly. He's still slightly uncomfortable and unnatural when someone's on his chest and pushing him on a back foot. Don't get me wrong, Joseph Parker is a very good fighter. He beats the vast majority of heavyweights out there. He's a world champion now, and when you are a world champion, it's logical that the next questions raised are, how would you do against one of the other world champions? How would you do against the best heavyweights in the world? And at this stage, I would say Joseph Parker is a little bit of a way off being ready for those sort of fights. That's my opinion. I'm sure we'll discuss it further in time. It's an exciting time for the heavyweight business. I hope that in time Joseph Parker does have the good fights and the big fights. I just think perhaps another one or two learning fights on the job as world champion would do him some benefit. He's got to this position very young, and there's still little bits of his game that need to be worked on from my perspective. Leave your thoughts in the section below. Do leave your comments on how you scored the fight, who deserved to win. Leave your comments on both guys' performances in there. If you've enjoyed the video, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel or you haven't done so before for whatever reason, please hit subscribe so you can check out all of my other stuff. Lots more heavyweight boxing to come in the next 24 hours, so I'll be covering all of that as well. Many thanks for watching.